Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, Mahin the Podcaster. And on today's show, I am honored to have Paul Williams from Blogging Theology on the show. Paul, you're most welcome, sir.
Alhamdulillah, yeah. Walaikum assalam. Yeah, I've noticed you've nicked my opening words there.
I love the British politeness. You know what I'm saying? I think that's something that I think we Americans sometimes need to work on our adab. And I think like Brits sometimes have this like natural adab in a way.
Okay, that's extremely generous and completely untrue, but thank you.
For sure. You have, as our mutual friend Dr. Ali Atai says, the best channel on YouTube.
Well,
And
I think that's hyperbole, but it's very, very, very nice of him to say that.
And I think when I checked yesterday, you were up to 170,000 subscribers. And if I recall, you just started your channel like during the pandemic, right?
Exactly.
And I've been doing this podcast thing since 2016. I've done close to probably maybe over 300 interviews by now. Wow. Between multiple channels. And what my observation was, your channel, its growth, to me, it almost goes against common logic. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. A lot of times you see channels blow up. They talk about clickbait stuff. It's very like entertainment focused. Your topics are very like intellectual and deep. It requires some kind of critical thinking. It requires people to maybe do some background research and be interested in a deep subject. And in our day and age, people are just distracted with social media and all that. So I'm curious, why do you think your channel has resonated with so many people in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, that's actually an extremely good question. I think because I've done the opposite of what you should do, and perhaps the origins of the channel would explain perhaps how it's come about. So, as you rightly say, during the COVID lockdown, this was 2 years ago. We couldn't even go anywhere. It was like the streets were empty. A lot of the shops were closed. I had an essential job, so I had to go out to work every day. But it was like a post-apocalyptic scene. It was really bad, and very isolating. And I thought what I do was I come into some money. So I thought, well, I'll just splurge this money on buying a brand new MacBook Pro. Now, I didn't need a new MacBook Pro really that much with all this memory and all this stuff. It was a bit of a luxury. By the way, in retrospect, it's exactly what I need, but at the time, it wasn't what I needed. But I thought, why not? And I thought, well, I'll just do some YouTube videos. So I started up this thing called Blogging Theology with like 3 followers. It was me, the cat, and my mother or something, and that was it. And I just did what I wanted to talk about. So I'm interested in books and theology and philosophy and history and Islam and blah, blah, blah. So I just shared my interest with an incredibly small and select audience. What I didn't do, which is what some other people do, and maybe I should have done. Well, I don't think that I should have done, but is create content that was clickbaity with an eye to attracting an audience, with a view to making it entertaining, and we're intending to make it interesting by using all the tricks of the trade that YouTube videos can tell you how to make content and to get viewers. I didn't do any of that because I really wasn't interested. I just wanted to share my passion for theology and history and philosophy and whatnot. So that's what I did. I didn't do what I should have done. I broke the rules. I didn't follow the correct procedure, if you like. And from that, because I wasn't looking to produce clickbaity material, and maybe that's part of the reason I did it in reverse. Instead of starting off looking for how to make it successful, I actually wasn't interested in making it successful. I was interested in producing content that really interested me and hoping I would connect with like-minded people. But it was also a way of me breaking out of the isolation of COVID, actually, and connecting online. I mean, that was a big motive, actually, and using this outrageously expensive computer that I didn't really need and just sort of using it. So these were the kind of motives that I had at the beginning.
Like, so it almost seems like as you're talking, like my theory is that, marketers talk about you have to niche down. You can't appeal to everybody, right?
True.
And I resonated with what you said about surely there are like-minded people like you who have these similar interests.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, there's probably more than 170,000 of those in the world. There's probably a lot more people who are like interested in these topics, because if you look at the world population, it's just that like sometimes the clickbait stuff seems to attract like the youth, because like the youth drive everything, right? I would assume you have your demographic. You probably have an older audience. If you I don't know if you've looked at, I don't know if you've ever done studies on that, but I would assume your audience is a little bit more mature.
Well, I'm not really into comparative demographics.
Yeah.
I think the big 3/3. I have looked at the demographics on the YouTube stats, and there's big 3 blocks. So there's the 18. So there's the 18 to 24. I mean, it's kind of like young, middle-aged, and older. But at the extremes, there's much fewer. So like under 18, very, very few.
Sure.
Over, I don't know, 70 or something, very, very few. But it's kind of fairly evenly spread from the 20s to the 50s and 60s. Actually, it's but yeah, I think another reason is, I mean, for example, the longest video I've ever done is 4 hours long with Professor Al-Tubki, who's a professor at Brandeis University of Islamic Studies in America. And he did a video in June this year on LGBT and Islam. And it's had over 100,000 views, 108,000 as we speak. It's 4 hours of scholarly content with no attempt to be clickbaity whatsoever.
Right.
And yet it's one of my most successful videos, certainly the longest one. It's had over 100,000 views. I mean, this breaks all the rules. And I think, why is it so successful in terms of, I mean, it's been translated. They've had professional German translator, professional French translator. It's going viral in other languages, which is great. Arabic, we've got an Arabic translation as well. That's very good. And I think part of the reason is that there hasn't been so far, at least I'm not aware of, any sustained attempt to address this issue of LGBT wokeism and Islam from a rigorously Sunni Orthodox mainstream Islamic way that people can access, that just goes through, you know, what is wokeism, what's going on with gender and trans and homosexuality and all that, and just going through it in an objective way, you know, not being harsh or refuting or polemical in a crude way, but just trying to present the history of it, what's going on, you know, what are the issues and why are we having these issues now? Where have they come from? And then presenting a very balanced, sober, mainstream Sunni response from someone who's actually qualified to do it, i.e. a professor of Islamic studies at an Ivy League university in the United States. I mean, he taught Arabic at Harvard as well, or Yale. I think it's Yale or Harvard. And this guy is seriously qualified to talk about it at the highest level. And he produced some great slides, which are very accessible, and his demeanor is very, you know, you can listen to him. He's great. So it kind of met a need. But what I didn't do, and what he didn't do, was engineer it to be clickbaity. And because if we had, just imagine, what would we have done? Well, we can't have this video more than 20 minutes long. So we've got to condense it all down and simplify, pare it down, make it easy for absolutely everyone. You know, if we'd done that, it would have been a disaster, because it would have lacked the substantial content that was really, people would need to hear that content because it answers a real need in the world. I mean, I'm not saying that other people hadn't done it. You know, Yasser Qadhi has spoken on this issue and others, but in this kind of presentational way with slides, with the sources and the references to the Quran and other things in a very systematic way hadn't been done. I don't think had been done before.
Right.
So it met a real need that people wanted a substantial answer to these issues from an Islamic point of view, without being extreme or polemical or vicious or you know, ad hominem, in just a very sober way. And I think that's why it's successful. And the credit goes to Professor Al-Tubki, of course, for doing this so well. And he cares about this subject passionately, and he's doing a marvelous job. It takes courage for someone in his position as a senior academic in an American university to actually speak out on this issue, because of deplatforming and cancellation culture and accusations of this, that, and the other. You know, he took a risk with his career
Right.
to do this. I mean, he's
Yeah.
got a family. You know, this was not just, oh, wouldn't it be nice to talk about it? This can actually destroy your life if you get it wrong. It could
Right.
destroy my life if I get it wrong, because I could be banned and whatever. So, but he did it in a way. There's been absolutely, he tells me, no blowback at all from anyone.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting because, yeah, you would think that Brandeis. You said Brandeis, right?
Yes.
Yeah, these are like it's
It
like more.
is a very top research university,
But it's like one of the elite liberal institutions in America, right? So, segueing into like so the main topic that I wanted to cover with you today, that when I approached you was, I think that I know you're in the UK, but you've engaged with a lot of Christians. You were a Christian before, and you've engaged with Christians in America as well. I feel like American Muslims need to understand how to engage with Christianity and Christians, because America's always been perceived as kind of a Christian country with Judeo-Christian values. And even today's day and age, with the rise of secular liberalism, Americans still consider themselves to be more religious than their European counterparts. So because of this, I think Muslims in America need to have at least some understanding of Christianity and Christians. Maybe it's a lesser extent Judaism and Jews, but as a Muslim, where would you start if you wanted to get a basic non-polemical understanding of maybe it's Christianity first, and then a little bit of Judaism?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, by the way, about Europe, I think Western Europe is very secular compared to America. This is true. But Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, and other are much more religious, arguably even than America in some ways. I mean, Poland, I mean, not going into the issues, but
Right.
yeah, it's just Western Europe that is the anomaly globally, I think. And parts of the United States, you know, the seaboard, you know, Eastern seaboard tends to be much more, you know, but wow. Well, this is a huge subject. It's a huge, big subject. So I'm just going to recommend some resources if people want to understand in a more scholarly way, without it being too inaccessible, these questions. There are several books I've got ready here that I will just mention and say why I think they're helpful. So my answer is going to be based on books. Okay,
Right.
it's not going to be based on YouTube videos, although there are good YouTube videos. I mean, some of them on my channel. But
Sure.
but if you just want something to get hold of, okay, I'll give you my list. This book is called The Historical Figure of Jesus by E.P. Sanders. E.P. Sanders is an American professor in a very leading university. I forget if it's Yale or Harvard, one of the top Jesus scholars in the world. This is written for the general public. It's highly recommended by the experts in the field. If you want to understand the historical figure of Jesus, the Jesus of history, rather than the Jesus of Christian belief, so who was the real Jesus of history? This is one of the best books you can get. Is by an expert, but he writes very well, and he'll take you through the more scholarly understanding of the Gospels and why they're not eyewitness testimony and why they're not necessarily historically reliable. And he's not polemical. In fact, he's probably a liberal Christian himself. Well, he is a liberal Christian himself, so he's not like hostile to Christianity. So that would be one example. Another one which is much more clickbaity. The title, this is the publisher's done this: The Brother of Jesus and the Lost Teachings of Christianity. That's a clickbaity title, whereas that is not. That's boring. And this guy, Jeffrey Butts, is an ordained Lutheran minister and professor of world religions at Penn State University. Another American. I'm sorry, this is all going to be about Americans. Now, what's good about this? The clickbaity title is okay, but basically he's talking about a guy called James or Jacob, who was the actual brother of Jesus. And this is not some kind of conspiracy theory. It even mentions it in the Bible that he was the brother of Jesus. But the point is that if you look at the history of James, he was actually appointed by the apostles, according to other sources, as the head of the church in Jerusalem. The mother church of the Jewish Christian faith was in Jerusalem. He was just what we today would call probably an Orthodox Jew. So in other words, he's like a Muslim in many ways. He obeyed the Sharia, the Halakha, the Jewish law. He worshipped one God. He certainly believed his brother was the Messiah, but he wouldn't have believed that he was somehow Yahweh. That's not a Jewish belief. And he would have been recognizably Jewish. And I say that because Christianity, as it then evolved and developed, particularly at the end of the 1st century and 2nd century, became a Gentile religion, a non-Jewish religion, which more or less abandoned the law, the Torah, the Halakha, or the Sharia, if you like, and became a completely different religion.
Right.
If you want to discover the lost teachings of Christianity, and although this is a sensationalist title, there is a lot of truth in it. This isn't really readable, and he draws on a lot of recent scholarship. And it's not polemical. He's a Christian. He's a Lutheran minister. If you want, my third book by another American, Mustafa Akyol. Now, Mustafa Akyol is associated with certain views to do with Islam, and that I'm not talking about that here. I'm talking about his book is The Islamic Jesus, How the King of the Jews Became a Prophet of the Muslims. This is a very good book, and I've had the privilege of speaking to him on the channel. And he knows his stuff. He knows his history, his scholarship. He's asking good questions, and he knows the Islamic sources. If you want the Islamic understanding of Jesus from a mainstream Sunni perspective, this is the best thing I've come across yet. His views on other subjects, he tends to be more modernist
Right.
and liberal. I mean, he would say this.
Yeah.
I'm not being nasty, but I'm not endorsing those views or opposing them. I'm simply saying on this subject, this is an excellent book on the Islamic Jesus.
Sure. Yeah. People need to like compartmentalize a little bit. They can't let the views in one hand affect, you know, the other way.
If I felt that his more liberal views infected or affected his book here, I wouldn't recommend it, but it doesn't really at all. You're right. I mean, some of the speakers I've had, the guests I've had on, I don't necessarily agree with their views at all. That's not the point. That they're honored guests because of their expertise in a particular area,
right?
Where they are acknowledged experts, like with a PhD or their professor in that area, and it's that area I want to hear them. I don't necessarily want to hear their opinions on anything else.
Right?
It may or may not be true, but that's not why they're guests. And you're right. I have to bracket out other things and focus on this one issue. So this book is very good for this issue. Doesn't mean I endorse or anyone should endorse or oppose any other views he has. That's a different subject.
Yeah, I think the issue that I find is that a lot of times Muslims, like when we first started learning about Christianity, it would be via a Zakir Naik video, right? Or then, and then so there's a Netflix show that just came out you guys have well, maybe it didn't hit in the UK,
yes,
but
the whole planet has Netflix. Yeah, don't worry.
Well, I mean, but I'm saying that like Netflix UK might be different than Netflix America.
Okay.
There's different programming, right? So there's a show that came out called Mo. It's it's like about Mo Amer. He's a Palestinian comedian. So he got his own series. And in this show, he's Palestinian. He's Muslim in the show. He's a Muslim in real life. He plays a Muslim, and he has this Mexican Catholic girlfriend. And he tells her, like, why do you guys worship three gods? And if you told any Christian that who's a Trinitarian, they would say, we don't worship three gods. You're misrepresenting our faith. I think that's where a lot of times Muslims who just consuming like Zakir Naik or that kind of content will just go down, and then you're not really going to get anywhere, because I think my realization is that a lot of Christians who are practicing have a very emotional pull to their religion. And you're just not gonna like say some words and be like it's not like I think sometimes we just have this naivety that if they want something with one God, they know their thing is that's the best thing they have. They don't know there's anything else out there. And I've actually found in my experience that's really not true. They have there's an emotional thing that every person of faith has with their religion that you just can't get it. And I learned this from so a few years ago, and I want to segue into this a little bit. I took this. I don't know if you ever heard of this guy, Nicky Gumbel. He's out of the UK. This is his book called Alpha. He has.
I know about the Alpha course. I know Nicky Gumbel. I've seen him. Yes, is the answer. But you're going to ask me.
Yeah. So sometimes I mention to people and people haven't heard of it. But I took an Alpha course at a non-denominational church back in 2018, and it was a great experience to be honest. It was very well conducted. I would say the branding at the church was on point. They had like a nice little coffee lounge. It's in like downtown Chicago, so it attracts like young urban professionals, and they're easy to get along with.
Yes.
The format was you would have like this video, and then you'd have a discussion for like 40 minutes, and the discussion sometimes I would pull back a little bit. I would just listen, but sometimes they would ask me for my take. They knew I was a Muslim. They knew I wasn't like, and I think I was kind of, maybe I may have been a little too like belligerent on certain points. But I remember at the end of the day, we had a moderator in the for our discussions, and at the end of the 10 weeks, she came up to me and we were having a conversation, and she's like, "Hey, this was really fun. I thank you for coming." And then I was asking her some questions about like historicity and all that kind of stuff, and she was like, "Yeah, there are things that we do that like our leaders are now finding problematic." So I was at a retreat, and so she's admitting that there's gaps for sure, right? But she's like, listen, at the end of the day, like all I know is that there was a man who walked this earth, who died on the cross and did these miracles. So that sounds like a guy I want to follow. Like they really reduction, And I was like, well, I have no problem with following Jesus. I just don't believe in that whole narrative. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's where we kind of came to an end. So I think it's like you've created a system that they want to, and I'm talking about not alpha, but I'm saying a lot of non-denominational liberal Christians. They acknowledge, oh, there's gaps, but this works for me personally, and just leave me alone. And I think that's what we have to like at least understand. You're just gonna beat a dead horse. You're not gonna like, if they want something else, they have to open up themselves and go, and then you might have some dialogue. Otherwise, they're just perfectly fine to coexist with, right? And you don't have to worry about them, because I think it's also the annoying part is when you deal with evangelicals, you might agree with some more conservative views on them, but then they're always trying to preach to you, and like, and you're like, just, hey, I'm like, we're beating a dead horse here. Let's just talk about this, and they don't want to do that. So, and from my vantage point, I actually have come to appreciate the non-denominationals in a way where they're just like they're more respectful. They're not like, because some of the evangelicals can come off as jerks, right? So you can be friends with them, the non-denominational types, and you kind of know where you stand, right? And they might have a question every now and then. Oh, what does Islam say about this? And I'll tell them. And they're like, okay, cool, or vice versa. And you can have some discussions, but there's no like it's almost like there isn't really dialogue going on. It's just like, hey, you're my friend because we have a common interest in chess or martial arts or football or something, right? So, anyways, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that we should be more accommodating? Should like our relationship versus, I guess, Muslims with evangelical Christians versus like non-denominational? Those are just my observations. They're anecdotal, of course, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I mean, coming back then to your first point about the Alpha course, which is probably Britain's most successful Christian export in history. It was invented in Kensington, just down the road from here, in a church known to everyone as HTB, which is Holy Trinity Brompton. In Kensington. It's a very, very wealthy part of London indeed, and that is relevant because the kind of demographics it attracts, as you suggested, kind of not just young professionals, but wealthy, well-heeled people. And that's just the way it is. And Nicky Gumbel and other people like Sandy Miller created it some time ago, some years ago. Sandy Miller, Nicky Campbell, I think, is just retired. And it's a great idea. It's a course, so introducing people to Christianity. So you go along there once a week and you have a meal. It's all very civilized and everyone's very nice. It's in the church usually, and then there might be a video or discussion from a leader. And it's not pushy. It's not evangelistic in the sense of being intolerant and preachy. And so you go through the Gospel of Mark, or you talk about, who was Jesus and what about the Holy Spirit and stuff like that. You go through it's an introduction to Christianity, but it's a particular kind of Christianity. So it's not liberal Christianity. It's not it's not in its origin Catholic Christianity or anything else. It's evangelical Christianity, but with a particular British Anglican or Episcopalian, as you'd say in America, spin on it. So it's upper class. And terribly civilized. I mean, I'm using slightly ironic language there, but it just is like that. So I think in my life, I've been on 2 courses when I was a Christian. one in my church in London. And I've been to HTB, to see how they worship and all that. It's been exported globally. It's hugely successful globally. I mean, and there are now Catholic versions, and there are other versions which you can participate in. The Catholic version talks about the church more and about the Virgin Mary and the sacraments and the papacy and things like that. So it's probably the most significant and successful Christian missionary outreach in a century. It is hugely impactful globally. It's difficult to overstate how significant this is because it's so successful. Everyone wants to get in on the act. All the churches now want to get in on the act. I mean, I know Muslims have been on it 3 times. They just maybe it's the food they want to go for. I don't know. But at the end of it, that there's a retreat away, and people. That's when you have the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and it gets a bit charismatic, and there's a little bit of understanding. You might just become a Christian. I think at that point.
I skipped that one.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. You want to be on that. It gets a bit. That's when you really got to kind of make your commitment to a particular brand of Christianity.
Right.
But it is conservative Christianity. So there are other brands like the more liberal or modernist or secular version. So that's it's not just Christianity; it's a particular brand of Christianity. But they're nice people, and it's not particularly heavyweight. I mean, they're not academics and so on that go on it. It's kind of fun. But as regards to the belief in one God, I think that there's an issue, there's a problem, there's a tension here, because if you look at the official teaching of, say, the Catholic Church, and I mentioned the Catholic Church because it's the biggest church on earth now, and always has been since probably the 2nd century or the end of the 1st century, depending on how anachronistic you want to be. So this is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is the definitive edition. This is produced by Pope John Paul II. Asked this to be done. So this is what the church officially teaches. And it does say very clearly on page 54 that there is one God. Absolutely clear. Monotheism is a creed of the church. But the Quran doesn't quite leave it like that, because the Quran has a critique of, as you know better than I, that Christians have made a God of Jesus. They've made a God of Mary. They call on Mary. They call on Jesus. They're committing shirk, basically.
Right.
Because Jesus, Jesus in the Quran actually says, the real Jesus actually says, I didn't say this. I never said this. I am just a messenger of God, and so on. And so Christians have deified Jesus, so the Quran says, and they've also made Mary into a god. And many evangelicals say, well, this is false. We have never believed, and Catholics will say, this is false. We have never believed that Mary is a god. But actually, the Quran is making a very important point, and a valid point, I think, because in calling Mary the Mother of God, which Catholics do, Theotokos, in addressing her as the Queen of Heaven, which is another of her titles found in the book, in calling on her in prayer, the Hail Mary is repeated more than any other prayer in the church. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed art you. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. That's the Hail Mary, as it's called.
Right.
When you pray the Rosary, you repeat this endlessly. The reason I think the Quran is critiquing, it says, in effect, you are treating her like a deity, because you approach her as someone you supplicate, you address as the Mother of God. She is a being alongside Allah, alongside God, as her son is a being also. In addition to God the Father, who is the biblical God, Yahweh. So the Quran is actually making from obviously I'm biased, but I think making a very insightful point. Even though Christians don't agree with the way the Quran describes it, it's the question of, is the Quran right? And I think, was Mary originally the Mother of God? Was Jesus originally God? The answer historically, if you look at the evidence, is there's no evidence that Jesus thought he was God originally at all. Sure. And this is a later belief. So the Quran is saying, this is not a correct belief. In effect, you're committing shirk. It's a kind of polytheism, if you like. So even though Christians say they believe in one God, the belief is compromised. It's not Tawheed, as the pure monotheism of Moses and Jesus and Muhammad, peace be upon them all. So there's a real issue there, but it's complicated. And if you want to get, as I say, this is the biggest church on earth. What do they really believe? You can read this online. Or you can, If you want something more academic, this is the text I use as an undergraduate, Early Christian Doctrines by J.N.D. Kelly. This is a standard work at undergraduate level. You want the history of the early church doctrinally in terms of the Council of Nicaea and the beginnings of Christology and the Council of Chalcedon and the Doctrine of the Trinity. This is an excellent readable book by J.N.D. Kelly, who was an English academic. And just finally, I mentioned this is actually one of my favorite books from a Catholic book called The Shape of Catholic Theology. We're now getting into this seriously postgraduate level, but hey, by Aidan Nichols, who's an Oxford Dominican theologian. OP means Order of Preachers.
Sure.
And this I found to be a particularly wonderful book talking about the role of philosophy and theology and the nature of Catholic doctrine at a fairly high level, because it is very sophisticated. Actually, I find it very interesting. So this is moving up. You've got Zach and Ike on one end, and and the other end in terms of the depth of exploration of these issues is found in some books that I've just mentioned here.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess what are your as far as so you've taken Alpha yourself then?
Yeah, twice.
Yeah, twice. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right.
I didn't say to the end, by the way, because at the end of the course, because I was already a Christian when I took it. But I went along to see what the fuss was about. It was good.
Okay.
The food was good. The food was great.
The food was good. Sometimes they would get me special because like if there was meat, I wouldn't eat I only eat like zabiha. So it was like they would bring me like a tuna sandwich or something from like a sub shop, especially. So it was fine. I think their brand. I would say their branding. I think we can learn a lot from their branding and their presentation. For sure.
Outstanding presentation skills. It's been incredibly successful globally. It still is very, very successful globally. Yeah. And there's lots of books and videos and whatnot online you can see produced by them as well.
Yeah, I think the issue. I think the church that I went to, they did not want. If you ask their preachers or their pastors on their opinions of certain issues, like behind the scenes, like LGBTQ or abortion, they would tell you, but it wouldn't be like something that would be emphasized. Right?
Well, that's yes and no, because when I did it back in the early, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago or something,
okay,
they did their published material did mention homosexuality.
Oh, okay.
One of Nicky Gumbel's book, I think it's Questions of Life.
Yeah.
There was actually a whole chapter on it. If you look up that, I was looking at last year, looking at this same book, it's been edited now, and these controversial issues have been removed. They're no longer in the Alpha material. Okay. And I was quite shocked because this is supposed to be a Christian missionary evangelistic organization. And what they're doing is they're basically hiding or concealing, or maybe they don't even agree anymore. I mean, I actually don't know the reason, but one can guess. They're concealing those things which cause friction with potential converts to their religion.
Right.
So assuming that most young people in America, I don't know, but in America and Britain are now pro-LGBT. So they don't want that to be an issue or stumbling block. So they remove it from their religion. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is such an Islamic critique, isn't it, of the religion, how they've changed the religion to meet men's desire. I mean, it's almost like happening in front of us, in the last few years.
Well, yeah.
Successful evangelistic enterprise in a generation is actively removing those things that conflict with Western secular liberalism, basically.
So I've had a couple podcasts with these Pentecostal guys in Chicago. Now they're on the opposite end. Yeah. They're the ones that are protesting weekly. Well, they were before the whole Roe v. Wade overturn. They were at Planned Parenthood doing preaching outside every week, or they would be talking about openly talking about if going to the LGBT areas of certain cities and preaching there, right? And saying leave this lifestyle, you all are sinners, you're going to hell, that kind of thing, right?
Which, by the way, is a biblical teaching.
1 Corinthians
6:9. It's there Paul says that in the Bible. It's
right.
Not just Pentecostalists in Chicago. This is actually New Testament teaching. Yeah.
And I've spoken to their pastor several times. We've had lunch a couple times, and I think he's like, listen, it's part of we believe we're supposed to preach. This is a evil of the society, and we call it out, right? And so I was like, I can appreciate that, right? In that sense. My issue was always, though, that every time we had a conversation, there'd always be some sleight of hand. We're talking about Islam, he would always, have some negative, it would be some off-color comment, right? Yep. Where you're like, all right, come on. We're trying to have a civil conversation. And I'm not I thought we established, sometimes you're oh, we laid the ground rules down that hey, I'm not going anywhere. Like, and nothing you're gonna say is gonna like convince me, because this is why I don't believe in Christianity. We already talked about it. You haven't been able to address it. So therefore, I'm not converting to your faith, right? So let's leave that out. So I think my point was that, like, I think that it almost becomes dealing with some of these evangelical types. You seem to agree with them. You agree with. I appreciate their passion for the religion, right? They're not changing anything, but like they're just intolerant. They're just like, it's just annoying to deal with. So you'd rather just deal with these more like non-denominational types that will hide certain things or not talk about it. They want less friction just because it's for your own peace of mind. It's easier to get along with. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you think that is that the right approach? I would ask you from a Muslim's point of view.
It's a very strange world we live in. There's been a big change. There's some deep history and deep culture behind this. For example, one issue for the last 1400 years, or 1350 years, there's a reason I'm being pedantic here, is that Jews have found the Muslim world has included and welcomed the Jewish people in the Muslim empires, whether it be the Ottoman Empire or whatever. Right. They've found refuge in the Muslim world from persecution, vicious persecution from Christians. Now, that's not polemical. That's just a fact of history. And that's been the overwhelming case for nearly the last 1400 years. In other words, the length of Islam itself. From the Medina, the time of the Prophet, when the constitution of Medina, where Jews were seen as part of the Ummah. I mean, this is interesting. What has happened now since a certain event in the 1940s, a certain establishment of an entity in the Middle East, is that there's been an unprecedented, unparalleled enmity between Zionist Jews occupying Palestine and Muslims. Mm-hmm. And so now there's a great deal of bad blood. I don't tell you that we all know the bad blood between Muslims and Zionist Jews generally. But historically, Christians are the ones that have excelled amazingly in being anti-Semitic. If you look at the way, going back to the early fathers who are revered in Christianity, people like Chrysostom and others, they were vicious against Jews. The language they used was actually recycled by the Nazis and published by them. Look at Martin Luther, who started the wonderful Reformation to free the church from the Catholics. The way he spoke about Jews, you can't even speak publicly. It was so vicious and evil, really. I mean, they were, I'm not going to repeat it on your channel. But what's happened today is for, say, American Christians, the Jews are their new best friends. They're overwhelmingly Zionist. If you look at the biggest voting bloc of Zionists in America, it's not the Jews, it's the Christians. Numerically, the Republican voting white evangelicals vote are passionately pro-Israeli Zionist, and they elect people like Trump and everyone, so you've had a complete reversal. Historically, is Muslims have included, welcomed, and Jews have flourished in the Muslim world, and Christians have been those who sought to exterminate very often, leading up to the Holocaust, which happened in a Christian country, Germany, where Luther was born. It was a very civilized country, the birthplace of the Christian Reformation. Germany ultimately led to the Holocaust of the Jews. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. It's just so mind-bogglingly weird. In the Muslim world, Jews were allowed to flourish, practice their faith century after century after century after century. But now it's all reversed. I'm not saying Muslims are persecuting Jews in that way, but they're bad blood now. So the new best friends of the Jews are the Christians, and the new people you've fallen out with are the Jews, the Muslims. Like a internecine family squabble between two Semitic peoples. If you want to see Arabs as the Muslims, well, of course they're not. Most Muslims are not Arabs. But anyway, so there's been an ironic change of roles here. Right. And people have short memories. They think, oh, well, Muslims don't like the Jews. Well, actually, it's the Christians that don't like the Jews historically. Right. And the Muslims are actually very accommodating, because Muslims believe in Tawheed. Jews believe in Tawheed, I should say, as well.
Right. Yeah.
And Christians don't.
Right.
And most Orthodox Jews see Christians, believe it or not, as idolaters.
Sure.
idolaters. And this idea that you get in America and in Britain, we talk about the Judeo-Christian civilization or Judeo-Christian tradition in the West. Wow, isn't it wonderful? But Orthodox Jews don't want to be associated with the Christian tradition because it does, as Muslims believe, it promotes shirk, idolatry.
Right.
This is not something you want to be part of.
Right.
But it's all changed. It's all messed up and crazy. And so when you have evangelicals now having a problem with Muslims, I mean, they should have a problem with Muslims and Jews together as both believers in the one God of Abraham, believers in Tawheed.
Right.
But it's not how they do it. They see Jews, Christians do it as their friends because they support Israel and they're buddies with the Jews. What? Where did that come from? These guys commit shirk, they worship the Messiah. Right. These guys are not our buddies.
Right.
They're kind of weird, way out there. So the whole thing has gone really messed up. And I think because of what's happened politically in the 1940s, that's really the reason. I can't think of any other reason at all. Maybe you know better, but so that's why it's all messed up. And that's why evangelicals have a problem with Muslims, but they really love Jews. And I'm thinking, this doesn't make any sense because Muslims and Jews believe exactly the same thing when it comes to Tawheed. And it's the Christians that are out on a limb who should be the problem, not Muslims.
Right. My perception is that I think it's because some of them have an inferiority complex and they won't want to talk about theology with you. They just will preach from the Bible. I was having one of their deacons called me one time. I had him on the show because there was a whole scandal about a restaurant in Chicago a couple years ago where they didn't stand for Black Lives Matter and they got canceled. This was they were the number one ranked restaurant in the state of Illinois on Yelp.
Wow.
And number 33 in the country. Wow. And within 4 days, they went out of business because of cancel culture. It was crazy. And I sympathized with that because I was like, this is wrong.
Yeah.
Like and so I had him on the show and the brother of the owner called me because he's a deacon. He was a deacon at the church and he runs their establishment down in Dallas. And he's like, hey, can I just call you sometime? We'll just talk. We're chatting and stuff, just kind of getting to know each other. But then when he got into theology, he's quoting me David Wood. He's like, you should read about David Wood has some great stuff about the Quran. You should read. I was like, I'm gonna pass. But I think when it came down to I asked him, he's like, well, Maheen, in the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of Matthew, it says X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, listen, let's back up here. What, when did the Gospel of Mark become the Gospel of Mark? And then, because I'm like, at the end of the day, because we believe in Isnad and Sanad and all this, and then that was making his head spin. He's like, well, I don't know nothing about that, but this is what the Bible says, and because it's basically these tropes they just spit out. And anything deeper.
You say when Mark, the earliest copy of Mark we have, complete copy, is in the 4th century. This is 400 years since after the birth of Jesus. Can you imagine if Muslims are criticized, Bukhari is X centuries? Excuse me, your own scriptures have absolutely no isnad at all. And the earliest complete copy is 4 centuries after the birth of Jesus, and you have a problem with Muslims.
Right.
They're completely unaware of their own scriptures and how lacking in historical reliability and attestation they are, but they've got the kind of David Wood polemic against Muslims. But I'm sorry, if you're consistent here, you should really sort out your own mess first. But probably they're not going to sort it out because there's nothing there to sort out. There's no isnad. We don't know who. These are all anonymous texts. No one knows who wrote them.
Right. If you ever want to see a train wreck of a discussion, on my channel I had the pastor of the church. Usama Dakdak. Have you heard of him?
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, he's an Islamophobic Egyptian, I think. Egyptian guy lives in America, and Ijaz, you're familiar with Ijaz Ahmed.
Yeah,
Ijaz, and it was just if you want to see a train wreck of a discussion, I had it on my channel a year ago.
Ijaz was involved. I'm not surprised it was a train. He would have surgically removed every limb, I think.
Right, for sure. Yeah. And we have about 15 minutes to go here, and I wanted to actually. There was an interesting point you meant earlier. We talking about how the deification of Mary. As a former Christian, what do you like? How does the internal thought process work when you're going from, because Christians, if you're a Christian, you believe in one God, right? But you have some, I guess, verbal gymnastics to that helps you reconcile the Trinity with the one God idea, right?
Yeah.
What happens internally to take that person to become a Muslim when they are actually like, number one, we agree that they, number one, have to internally feel like there's some kind of gap that they can't like live with. I would assume that's number one.
Okay.
But how does that path look like internally, like for them to get from point A to point B?
I think part of the problem is, part of the challenge for Muslims is that for many Christians, that their faith is based on emotion. I think you've
Okay.
already said this, actually.
Right. Yep.
Particularly in American context, evangelical context. So you'll
Yep.
have a charismatic preacher who will spin this wonderful story of how God so loved the world that he became a human being and died. God died for you on the cross. Isn't that an amazing demonstration of love? And what other religion is like that, and so on. But if you hear this often enough, you might go along to church a number of times before you accept this and you embrace it and become a Christian. What you're not doing is you're not really reflecting rationally on this. The idea, for example, of God dying, which is a key trope in this, is absurd, obviously, because what the Bible calls God immortal, which means he doesn't die. And why I'm mentioning all this is because many Christians' faith, and they often is profoundly part of their identity, is based on this emotional adherence to a beautiful, inverted commas, idea. And then along comes a Muslim, an educated Muslim, and they're going to say, think about this, use your mind, reflect. How can this? How can that? How can God die? And they're going to be presenting these kind of quite reasonable objections or questions of the doctrine. But that's not the level on which the Christian is living their life. So they have to, what they're doing, the Muslim is doing there, by the way, exactly what the Quran says they should do. It is, have you not considered? Think about this. This doesn't make sense. Jesus and Mary ate food. And in that incredibly succinct phrase lies a lot of interesting ideas about who they really were. They were just human beings.
Right.
And so you've got to somehow, the Christian has somehow got to actually allow himself or herself to think and to detach themselves just momentarily and think, is this rational? Does it actually make any sense? Or is it even true? And they've got to allow themselves to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of these discussions can be quite ego-driven. We're all fallible, and we make mistakes. And if I, as a Muslim, are critiquing a Christian's views with a Christian, he probably will, understandably, get very defensive.
Yep.
And this is not going to help the process of him opening up and thinking reflectingly about his beliefs. He's just going to get defensive and hit back.
Right.
That's probably a waste of time, really, because what's it going to achieve?
Right, exactly. Well, that's the same thing that happened when I was talking about like the Pentecostal deacon talking to me. Like, when you you're quoting David Wood, like if I feel like if a Christian knows about Bart Ehrman, I'm cool. Bart Ehrman says this, right?
Yeah.
Then you're kind of like, well, you're not gonna get like, if they know who Bart Ehrman is, they most likely, that's really not gonna get any traction. They're not gonna care.
No, because they see him as evil or demonic anyway. I know it sounds extreme language, but they do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they actually say that. They say that Islam is a demonic religion. I mean, that's kind of what they'll literally say, like, whatnot. But if you were to give a book to a Christian pastor about Islam, which book would that be?
That's a temptingly easy question to answer. When people ask me to recommend books, I always ask, who is this person? How old are they? What's their gender? What's their educational level? I try and tailor it to the person. There's nothing worse than just giving a generic book, just throw it at them.
Okay. Can I niche you down real quick then?
Yeah.
35-year-old white male, pastor, non-denominational church, Masters of Divinity education.
Well, in that case, you've just given me a very easy answer. That easy, given this book, Islam and the Destiny of Man by Guy Eaton. Guy Eaton, British, I'm afraid. So actually, it's the first author I've mentioned who's actually is British. Now he was a Muslim for 50 years when he died several years ago. He was a diplomat. He worked in the mosque near here. He was a Muslim, as I say. He's written some of the most beautiful books on Islam from a Western Muslim perspective ever written. So this book is not like an ordinary book. It's a beautifully written book. It's very spiritual. I don't necessarily agree with everything that he says now, because I'm not going to go into the reasons, but it's nothing fundamental that I think would stop people recommending him to be read. But given what you've just said, I think that would be the best, because Guy Eaton as a Westerner, a white Westerner, understands the Western experience very well, but he's also like a bilingual person. He understands the Islamic world perfectly as well. And so he can synthesize the two and explain it in a way that even many Muslims are not familiar with. And Muslims, when born Muslims, when they read this, often usually say, this has given me a new appreciation of faith. It's enriched their faith and answer questions often they didn't have answers to so far in their lives, actually. He's a Sunni Muslim. So I recommend that book or anything by Guy Eaton for the person you mentioned. But if you mention another kind of person, a 15-year-old who perhaps not, I would say, have you considered other media? Maybe it all depends on who they are, really.
Right. So the pastor of we had a pastor that coordinated our Alpha course. There's a lead pastor of the church and a pastor that coordinated the Alpha church, the Alpha course for us. He would pop into our sessions every now and then. He'd audit and just kind of jump in each session week to week. And he and I met a couple of times after. We had some conversation. Then he left the church. He moved out to Portland, like to the West Coast. So that's the book I gave him. So you and I are on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if someone with an open heart, a Christian open heart, reads this and they still don't become Muslims, I would say I would just leave them to God. I would just say it's up to God anyway. But you know what I mean? Right. I would say I have nothing more to say unless you had clarificatory points, because this is the best shot, humanly speaking, that I know of for someone like that. Right. I don't know any better way of doing it. This is just, and countless people of that kind of background have become Muslims through reading this. It's extraordinary work. If that doesn't persuade them at some level, I have nothing else to say, really.
Right. All right. Well, that being said, Paul, I appreciate you coming on. I know you're in London, so you got to go to Speaker's Corner, right?
Oh, of course, absolutely.
Is there anything on the agenda for Speaker's Corner today, or like how does it work? You just walk in there and there's a debate going on, or I've never been there.
Yeah.
How does it work?
Well, you must come along and see the madness. It's basically a corner of a park called Hyde Park, public park in London. It's about 20 minutes walk from where I'm sitting at the moment. This is my local park. And it's set aside by Act of Parliament, so it's by statute that this area is protected for many generations as an area of free speech. So in theory, you can go there and say what hell you like, and the police tend to be very tolerant of probably anything. I mean, you'd have to say something really stupid like calling for the killing of, I mean, things are obviously wrong. But in terms of opinions, you could be anything, and no one's going to touch you, and it's meant for that purpose. So, inevitably there are Muslims and there are Christians and atheists and whatever. Flat Earth people, the Flat Earth Society, who tell you the Earth is flat, they go there, and all sorts of people. Just go along, and I've got some friends there. I chat to them, or if I find someone good to talk to, and unfortunately now, because there's a lot of cameras there for social media, if I start talking to someone, within minutes you're going to have several people filming it, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But it's mostly toxic. I would say on balance, don't go there. But if you're an addict like me and you really want to go there because you're used to it so much, it's like heroin.
Right. Does Jay Smith still come around?
No, thank goodness. I mean, no, he doesn't. No, he's gone back to you. He's gone back to you lot in America.
He left. Okay, he's not in the UK anymore. Okay.
No, thank goodness. He has given us a break. No, he has retired. Well, he moved back to the States because he's American.
Yeah.
He's one of you lot, so you can have him back. Thank you very much. But he went there for years. I mean, I've had several attempts to talk to him, and he was one of the most. Anyway, I'm not going to say anything rude about him on video. So he's gone back to America.
Okay, sounds good. And then people know where to find you. You're on YouTube, Blogging Theology again.
Yes,
the best channel on YouTube. So I appreciate you gracing my presence for the past hour or so. It was a real treat to have you on.
It's a great pleasure for me to talk to. I mean, I love Chicago, by the way. I don't want to go on about Chicago, but it's one of my favorite American cities. I've got some excellent friends there.
Okay.
And, great food, great, I just love it all. It's very, very good. I love Chicago.
Well, next time you come through, I'd love to host you. So take you out to dinner or something. So let me know. And I do have plans to come to the UK, hopefully in the next year and a half or so. So
we must come to Speaker's Corner and see the madness there.
Absolutely. All right. For my special guest, Paul Williams, I'm your host, Mahin the Podcaster. If you have any questions, you can email me at info@sultansandsneakers.com. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/sultansandsneakers. Till next time, this is Maheen signing off. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.